Okay, this is a tutorial on how to do three-point editing in the Adobe Premiere interface. So cover some about the Adobe Premiere interface and some of its quirkiness and ways around some of its annoying quirkiness, we could say. And we'll also go through the basic concept of three-point editing, do a few edits, and show you a little bit about the best workflow. So when you first open Adobe Premiere, you will be taken to a title screen and it will ask you if you want to open a project, start a new project, and then it will have some import functions. I don't recommend using any of those tools that are kind of spoon-fed things where the Premiere interface tries to anticipate what you want to do and try to tell you what you want to do. I've never been a fan of this approach. And as we are becoming professional editors, or at least professional level editors, there doesn't seem to be any good reason to use those tools. They are admittedly a little bit more convoluted and a little harder to use, in my opinion. So I'm going to show you a little bit more the straightforward way. So when you come to that screen, you can just start a new project and then close that window out, and you'll be taken to an interface that looks something like this. So in this case, I made a project called 3-Point Editing, and this is the default editing layout. Now, if your layout looks a little different than this is pretty simple to change. If you go under the window menu, you will see that there is a submenu of workspaces, and among all these are different layouts that make more sense based on what you're trying to do. If you're not already in the editing layout, you can just choose it from here, or shortcut Alt-Shift-7. This is a Windows machine. If you're using a Mac machine, I believe that would be Option-Shift-7. But either way, you can just go to than you should be now. So let's walk a little bit through what's in this interface. Everything's empty now because this is an empty project. So you have on the left side what's called the project window and project tab, but you can also access effects and history here. Effects becomes useful. History's not used that often, but generally you want this project tab. Now this gets a little confusing because up here there's a number of tabs as well, and that's for the whole screen. You'll notice one called import, and we will get to import in a second. I don't recommend using this import tab because, again, it's one of these folders that is kind of meant to look more like, I don't know, maybe more like a tablet layout with big buttons and pictures. But it also makes everything a little more complicated, to be honest, even though the thought is it's supposed to be a little easier. We'll get into that in a minute. But if you just go back to this edit tab, you could probably leave it here for almost your entire time. Project tab. So what this will be is a list of all the different assets we have in our project. Again, we don't have anything there yet, but that's okay. We'll get there. Over here is the source window where you'll look at clips before you edit them. This is the program window, which will show you what's already edited, and what it represents is what's in down here, the timeline window. So this is where all your edits will take place. So these two windows are always tied together. And sometimes all three of these windows are tied together. But for now, we want to do something, and we can't do anything until we get some footage. So what we are going to do is import footage, but we're not going to use this tab up here. We're going to either we can do this is go to the file menu and find import. That's one way to do it. Another way is to use the keyboard shortcut Control-I, Command-I on a Mac. Or the third way, and my preferred way, is if you right click, you can also just find import. as long as you right click anywhere here in the project window. So I can click anywhere here and choose import. When you do that, what's going to come up is a more familiar looking dialog box that has your files from your hard drive. So in this case, I've already got a folder that has 2 subfolders in it. And inside these subfolders, I have some music files and I have some video files. You can import many different things into Premiere. You can audio files, video files, combined audio, video files. You can import stills, different graphics, JPEGs, PNG files, and really a bunch of other stuff. For right now, the first thing I'm going to want to import is a music track. So if I double click, and I'll go back and show that again, the NFL Films music folder, you'll see that I have a bunch of tracks here. These are all 30-second tracks these are 60-second tracks that are NFL Films related and will be used for an editing assignment. So you can find whichever one you want. I'm just going to kind of guess what it sounds like and either double click it or click on the open button, and you'll see that it's brought into our project and it sits here in the project window. And if you double click it, it will open in the source side and you'll see the audio waveform. Now, the reason you're seeing audio waveform here is because it's an audio only file. If it was an audio and video file, we'd also see video, and we will do that here in just a moment. And you can scrub through this audio just by clicking. And as you can hear, it's kind of just at whatever speed you drag through it. And if anybody else is in the room with you at the time, they will probably be quite annoyed, but that's the price of doing video editing. Without headphones, you might annoy people. So also just hit play. Pretty straightforward. I don't know what any of these audio tracks sound like. You know, it would be kind of a hassle to import these one at a time, then listen to them. This is where the whole concept of non-destructive editing comes in. There's no disadvantage to importing a whole bunch of tracks. You can import 100 different audio tracks. It doesn't actually take up any more space in your project file. It just might be a little more complicated to sift through, but not as complicated as having to bring them in one at a time or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this and I'm going to delete it. And again, I'm not deleting any media files from my computer or from my hard drive. Everything that we bring into a nonlinear editor like Adobe Premiere is just a reference clip, like a shortcut or an alias, or if you had an iTunes playlist, it's just, the songs in the playlist. If you delete something from an iTunes playlist, you're not getting rid of the audio file. You're just taking it out of your playlist. You get kind of think of media in video editing programs in that same way. So if I come back and again, go ahead and right click import. And you notice I have all of these different tracks, dozens of them. What if I just want to bring them into Premiere and audition them all? That's easy enough to do. So if I back out to the next level of folder, I can actually select a folder like this NFL Films music. And rather than double clicking it to open it and find all the different files in it, I can just come down to this button here and say import folder, and it will import the whole thing. Now, again, another note about non-destructive editing. Non-destructive editing means everything that you import has to already be on a hard drive or an SD card or someplace. And all you're doing by importing is basically getting pointer or reference files to those original media files. So that's very good in the sense that no matter how much you bring into a project, it doesn't really make your project file any bigger. Now, this could also be bad because if you don't have those original files, you won't be able to use them if they go away. So if I were to import all this music from, say, an external hard drive or an SD card, I need to have that external hard drive or SD card every time I try to use the program. Otherwise, that media will be missing. We'll go into that in more depth in future lessons. But for right now, we have all the different tracks now, and we could audition them this way by clicking. I think my recording software is having a little trouble keeping up in the first few seconds, or a little choppy, but it should come through a little better. I want something quite as jazzy, so maybe I'll come down here, try this. Notice that this file is much lower. The waveforms are lower because I have actually edited the audio. So it's quite low, and I would have to think about. And so you can see source monitor, and that's a good thing. So that covers all the audio. So we got a bunch of music in here. That's great. But now we need to get some video tracks in here, or some video clips in here. So I'm going to right click again and choose import. Again, I could use keyboard shortcut Control I on Windows or Command I on a Mac. And if you see, I have this second folder called Super Bowl 48 footage. And in this case, I could do the whole folder thing again, or I could double click and look that there's only 2 clips in there. So I could also just drag and select those 2 clips and just do the regular open button, and you see they'll both come in. This is really a personal preference. You could bring in the whole folder so that they stay organized in that folder. Anytime you bring a folder in, if you import the whole folder, it will keep whatever folder structure is in there. So if you import a folder that has subfolders inside subfolders inside subfolders, it will bring all those in. So if you organize all your footage outside of your editing program first, and then want to bring it in and keep that organization, you can do that by doing the import folder option. But either way, what you want is to have your footage inside Premiere. And similarly, if I double click one of these 2 clips, it will open the video and the audio in here. And you can see clip. This is about 13 minutes long of different highlights from the Seahawks Super Bowl that they won in the 2013 season. So I just have this divided into first half highlights, second half highlights, and the sound, the original sound from the highlight show that it came from comes with it. So that's what happens when you open anything, double click it, or drag it into the source monitor. Now let's look at this program monitor and the timeline. And as I mentioned earlier, these two are kind of tied together. So if I were to take a clip and drag it directly into the timeline. Now, before I do that, let me point out that before we can edit anything, we need to have something that's called a sequence. And all a sequence is your edited video. So we haven't edited anything yet. So we make a sequence. So that's kind of like your cut, if you will. And it plays in the timeline and also in the program monitor. So there's a couple of ways we can make a sequence. We could go under the file menu, do new and sequence. You'll notice there's also a Control N option that we could do a new sequence from also. When you do a new sequence, you're brought up with this big confusing menu of a couple dozen folders, each with them as many as a couple dozen presets with them, and even in there, some more presets. If you click on any one of these, you'll see some various settings as far as the size of the frame rate, the pixel aspect ratio. If we go back in time and use some older equipment, you'll find that there were pixels that weren't square. It's kind of a complicated way that the early digital videos of the 1990s, the digital video codecs, were dealing with some things that were trying to make it fit broadcast standards at the time. Once we moved into the era of HD, and then 4K and the future 8K, that became less important once computers were running frame rates rather than tapes. That became less important. So what you really have here is kind of a history book of old and complicated video formats that trying to pick just the right one can be really tricky. The good news is we don't need to do that at all. We can just cancel this, close out of this window, and rather than doing a new sequence that way, we can take any video clip. So this is a video clip. Let's say we take this first half video clip and drag it directly over into the program monitor, or down here, actually you have to drag it directly into the timeline. And when we do that, as I let go of the mouse button, it actually creates what's called a sequence. And this is the sequence down here with tracks and edits, though it's only one clip right now, one big long clip right now. But here's how you start to cut things, or one of the ways you would start to cut your video. Another way to do this, I'm going to go ahead and undo. So Control Z or Command Z on the Mac. You could also right click on one of these video clips and say new sequence from clip. That's going to pretty much do the exact same thing. And I'll go ahead and undo that as well, just to redo this process a couple times. If you will look up here, this time when I do it, keep your attention focused here. So right now we have these two video clips. But when I drag this down here, so just keep looking up at the project window, and I let go of my mouse, you will see that a new item is created here in the project window. And that is my sequence. Now you will notice that this gets a little confusing because these icons, though they look different from each other, they don't look that different from each other. When you're quickly glancing at it, you just see a lot of green. But these are two very different things. These two things are just raw footage. And if I double click it, it'll just open it up here in the into the source window. So if I double click here, see it goes to second half and goes there. If I double click this, it will open it up if it wasn't already open down here in the timeline window, opens your sequence. Now, the thing to remember about this is that it's really not from down here. We could, this is about 13 minutes of footage up there. You know, chopping this up and razor blading and dragging and moving, that's one way to edit, maybe not the easiest or most straightforward way to edit. So I'm actually going to delete this, and you can do that with the backspace or delete button. Both work the same way, and that goes away. So you might ask yourself, well, why would I bother putting that big clip in the timeline just to get rid of it? And the reasoning here is that we want to create a sequence that has all the settings that are exactly the same as the video footage that we're using. So by doing that and creating it by either dragging it into the empty timeline or right-clicking and choosing new sequence from clip, we're making a sequence that has all the exact settings of the footage we're starting with. So that alone is worth going through this process, you know, dragging it in, making a new sequence, and then deleting it. Because now we know we have a nice empty sequence that has the exact video settings we want without having to go through and try to guess what they are or type anything in. Now, the second thing we probably would want to do, since when we do make that sequence based on one of these two clips, it's going to name it for whatever clip we used. And that could also get confusing. So before I do anything else, I'm just going to click on that so that I can rename it. And I'm just going to call this 3-point video. Okay. So now we have this nice, clean, brand new thing in it. And start editing. So as we've seen before, we can bring a clip, partial or all, in by just dragging it in. So let's say we found a nice piece of music we like. So we'll use this one called Franco's Grab. Dramatic music is just literally drag the same thing right there into the timeline. Or maybe I cannot. I guess I have to drag it over to here. Or I could drag it from here. But the way, if you start dragging the playhead, the possible annoyance of your friends or anybody else in the room. Or if you notice when I take my pointer and put it right over this little audio waveform icon, it says drag audio only. You can grab it, click it, drag it over into the program window or right into the timeline. And if you drag it into the timeline, you have to try to drag it to an audio track. But let's do it this way first. So if I drag it over into here before clicking off the mouse, you'll see that there's a lot of different options. Like I can choose overlay, insert after, overwrite, replace. In general, you're almost always, when you use this method, going to choose insert or overwrite. And I would say 80% of the time I use overwrite. So if I do that and let go of my mouse, you'll see that it will put this audio clip right down. It's only 1 minute, and I'm looking at about 20 minutes of video. So if I want to zoom in a little bit, we could do that by dragging and dropping dragging and clicking and dragging on different things like this right here. That will change the size. Admittedly, most people don't do it that way. They just use the plus and minus keys on the keyboard. So if I just hit plus, it'll zoom in a little bit more, and minus, it'll zoom out. This clip right here is 1 minute. And whether I zoom in so it's a little tiny or zoom in to make it look really wide, it's still only 1 minute. You notice as I do this zooming in and out, the numbers scale change, but really it's all going to be relative. Now I'm going to delete that and show you another way you can do it. As I mentioned, directly into the timeline, but make sure, since this is an audio clip, you're going to drag it onto one of the audio tracks. Now we probably want it to start right at the beginning, so you can just kind of drag and drop it right there. And now video track, our new edit called a sequence, starts with 60 seconds of audio. We play it. Sounds a little like that. Probably zoom in by hitting the plus key. Once we start doing a lot of clips, zoom out with the minus key, we might get a little confused. If you want to just make sure that all of your clips on the timeline fit on screen in one place, there is an automatic button for that, and that is the backslash key. That's the key on your keyboard directly below your backspace. And so if you hit that, then you'll see, okay, it's going to spread it out to take up pretty much our whole timeline. So that's when you want to drag a whole clip in. But what if we want just pieces? Because we've got these, 23 minutes worth of footage here that we're probably not going to want to use all of. So we probably just want to use little bits. So if I double click one of these, and open it into my source window. So let's say we're just looking for our comes in. So the endpoint is where you want the video. So if I want to with these guys, mark an endpoint. See, it will say mark in. And I will tell you that almost nobody uses this little button or these little buttons for mark in and mark out. Because the keyboard shortcuts are really easy. The keyboard shortcuts for mark in and mark out are the letter I and the letter O. No modifier keys, just I or O. And isn't it nice that 100 or so years ago, when our QWERTY keyboard layout was being invented for the typewriter, that whoever made this invention of the layout had the foresight to know that we'd be using this keyboard layout someday for video editing and put the I key and the O key right next to each other. So lucky for us, this is very simple. So to say where we want to start the video, we set the endpoint like I did with this button, but you can do with the letter I. Clip to end. That. We can click this button which says mark out, or what I'm going to do this time is just tap the letter O on my keyboard. And you'll notice that this area here, this gray bar that we have or had, is now very small because this is only 6 seconds worth of video out of about 13 minutes. And you can see right here, this says this is your in to out duration. So I placed an in point 6 seconds and 10 frames before my out point. So this represents a short segment of this whole video. So this is called 3-point editing. So I've set 2 points. I set one in point. I set one out point. What we mean by 3-point editing is that to get an edit using 3-point editing, you need to have at least an in point, an out point, and then one more in or out point. And that in your playhead all the way to the front of the timeline, and I'm going to tap on the letter I. Now make sure that this window is active, because if I have this window active, it's going to reset my in point for my source. We don't want to do that. We can have this window or this window active, but either way, we either want to click on this button. Notice that there's a separate mark in button on the program monitor. So I can click that right there, and then it'll start adding this shaded area down in the timeline. And that shows where the video clip is going to be put. Now, since we don't have an out point here, it just kind of sends it off to infinity, to the end of the sequence. Now, you might be tempted to say, well, and find someplace to set. It gets a little confusing to the computer because now you've basically set an in point and out point here and an in point and out point here, but those durations probably don't match. So what's going to happen, see, this is only 5 seconds and 26 frames. This is going to override the out point that we did here, or it's just not going to let you do it. So if we try to drag this clip over and do an overwrite, it's going to say, hey, the source is longer than the destination. What do you want to do? And it gives you a bunch of choices. Do you want to ignore the source in point? You want to ignore the source out point? You want to ignore the sequence in point? You want to ignore the sequence out point? Or do you want to change the clip speed? This will actually slow-mo or speed up the clip to fit. This is almost always a terrible idea. So don't do that. As a matter of fact, even getting and making a choice in this window isn't a really great practice. So I'm just going to cancel this. And instead of that, I'm just going to go in here to get rid of the out point that I set. And the way you can do that is Alt 0. Nope. My bad. Alt Shift. There we go. Control Shift 0. Not 0. Control Shift O. I'll get it right. So let's go through. Now I got 4 points, which kind of makes everything confusing. We want to have at most 3 points for 3-point editing. Sometimes they only use 1 or 2 or even 0, but we'll talk about that later too. I don't want this out point anymore. I want to get rid of it. Keyboard shortcut Control Shift O means clear the out points. If you are using a Mac, I'm pretty sure that would be Command Shift O. You might want to test it out if you're running this on a Mac. So I'm just going to forget that out point. And now I'm going to make this edit. So I've got this 6 seconds, 10 frame of source with an in point and out point. I got another in point. So 3 points, in point, out point, in point. Good to go. I'm going to drag over here. I'm going to do overwrite, and it should edit that clip into my timeline. And it does. But it did something we don't want it to do, right? If we're trying to make some visual footage that goes to the music, notice that we've obliterated that section.
Sure. I love you too,
we get the sound from the clip that we just edited. But in this case, we probably don't want to do that. We're kind of trying to create a little music montage with our video clips. So I'm going to undo this. And then we're going to talk about what these little buttons, kind of light up buttons, do. So basically we're back to where we were, in point, out point, in point down here. And what this is saying is it's going to take the video and the audio, video 1 and audio 1, and edit into video and audio 1 and audio 2 and audio 3. We don't want to do that. We don't want it to obliterate the music that's on there. So there's a couple options we can do. We can literally turn off all of these audio buttons. And now, edit, all it's going to do is put the video over. And you can see I've got. And the old audio stays, which is what we want. I'm going to undo this edit and turn these back on. We can actually lock tracks in the timeline. If we turn these little locks on, and you'll see you get a little bit of like diagonal lines across it. If I try to do the edit now, it won't edit over anything that's locked. So it'll do what we wanted there. That's another alternative. Not a bad way to do it. Or, as I said, we can turn these off. If we only turn the left side off, you think of this row of buttons kind of representing this clip. It's going to say, okay, we're not going to add the audio in, but I still have these clips on and it's unlocked. It should put a gap there. No, it doesn't. It kind of second guesses what we're doing and says, we know what you want to do. Okay, so either way, if you turn this off or you turn these off, it won't come in. But let's say we didn't do any of that. Let's say we had all of these on and we made that edit and then it blasted over our video. We do have some other options. You can, if you click on this, it's going to click the whole thing. So if you deleted it, you would delete it all. But if I use my Alt key, Option key on a Mac, and click on just one piece of it, notice I'm only selecting the audio portion. If I hit delete, it's taking away only the audio. Now, that do a little red arrow. So if I just drag, I can bring that audio back. So that's one way to do it. Well, what if we wanted, I'm undoing all that again, what if we wanted both audios? Well, there's a way to do that as well. So this is, again, this left side is representing this clip, and the right side is representing what's down here in the timeline. I can take this A1, where our audio from this clip is, and I can click and drag down to A2. And then I'm going to actually just turn off the A1 down here. You notice the gray goes away. Now if I perform this edit, and I do the same overwrite, it's going to put the audio from this clip down in the timeline, but it's also going to keep the audio that was already there because I'm putting the new audio in a different track. And now we can play both.
Sure. Look, I love you too,
We have some music down here too. So that ends up getting a little bit muddy. So I think what we'll do is we'll just go back to what we had. And we're going to put this back up here, turn these tracks off, do a video only edit. Again, drag, overwrite. Oh, I went back too far. I have my 4 clips. So let's make sure while in the timeline here, I do Control-Shift-O. And then redo this edit, drag it over to overwrite. It only puts the video in, and now in here. And we're ready to put another clip in. When we want ready to put another clip in, it's just to do it. So we can go right to the edge of this. Play ahead and snap. Or any edit point you're nearby. I'm going to hit the letter I here. An in point and an out point in my timeline. And I'm going to come back here into this. Choose an I. So I'm only going to set an in here in the point here. And notice it kind of wiped out my old in and out points. That's good. That's what we want. And it's got all the way to the end, the gray here. But it's not going to put all that in there because our in and out points down here are shorter. So if I do the same thing, click, drag, overwrite, now it puts my second clip in there. Very dramatic. Notice plan. And the reason for this is because the footage that we have up here is a big long clip that already has a bunch of edits in it. It comes from the edit that we made, but the next two were already in the source footage. See? There's an edit there. There's an edit there. So you're going to want those edits in there, and you have to trim things up a little bit. But that you're dealing with it. Okay, so one final thing I want to go over here is I said earlier that you'll probably use overwrite or insert for most of your edits. And that's true. So I'm going to delete this here. And I wanted to put an edit in between half of this clip. Right? Now I could go and get a razor blade tool, cut this in half, drag it down, put the new edit in, then drag it back in place. Or I can just do something called an insert. Point. And instead of doing overwrite, when I drag over here, I'm going to choose insert. Now, when I let go, pay special attention to what's going on down here. I'm going to let go, and you'll see what's happened is that it has put the new clip in between the two halves. it sliced our clip in half and put it inside there. This might be, if you're used to old Final Cut Pro or Media Composer by Avid, it might be called a splice edit. And if you kind of think of this, the insert edit being used like film, editing film. You'd have a reel of film and you would literally cut it into two pieces and then glue the middle new clip you want in between the two pieces to make a long string. But you'll notice also something that happened that's kind of tricky is it doesn't matter that we didn't have either of these audio tracks on. In order to maintain sync, so to speak, it's cutting our audio in half to split and move those clips down. And we might not want it to do that. So I'm going to undo this and try to do this edit again. And this time I'm going to have to lock the audio track on the timeline. Do the same exact edit, drag, insert. Now it's going to cut that clip in half, move everything down without doing anything to the audio in my timeline. That's, again, it's a decent workflow, but it does get a little messy sometimes too. Really, in most cases, you're going to want to use the overwrite, because all the overwrite is going to do is, just like its name implies, it's going to overwrite whatever is in there. So if I did an overwrite edit in this same method, it would cover up some of this down here. So I go and I do overwrite. Notice it's just kind of wallpapering over what was already there. You may not care. You may have just cut that first clip really wide and you know exactly where you want it to go and you don't care that this is going to get covered up. Or not want to lose any of this, in which case to the end and then do your overwrite edit. I really recommend doing mostly, if not all, overwrite edits, just because it doesn't tend to throw off your sync, whereas the insert edit can throw your sync off or put holes in your audio, things that you don't want to have happen. As you get more seasoned and you do a lot more editing, you'll have your own preference. And you may choose, no, I like to work this way. I like to do insert edits, or maybe do some of the other edits, some of the fancier things. So I'm going to cover one more kind of bonus thing before I finish this video. And that is, how do I... You may have trying to get to very specific frames. Like, I want the exact frame. Well, rather than just clicking and dragging for getting through a bunch of stuff, but it definitely is very hard to pinpoint an exact frame when you're clicking and dragging. So a way to maneuver your the source, program, or timeline using keyboard shortcuts again, or just keyboard keys. The three buttons, the three keys on your keyboard that do this mostly are the J, K, and L keys. So if you look on your keyboard, you see they're all three in a row, J, K, L. And if you just want to play, start playing, I can hit the space bar. I know I just said JKL, but one of the most simple ways to do it is to hit the space bar. And it will play. And if I hit the space bar a second time, I can also play by hitting the letter L key. But what's different here is if I hit the letter L key again, it's not going to stop. It's actually going to start playing faster. And if I hit it again, it's going to play even faster. In fact, I could hit it up to 5 times to make it play faster and faster and faster until I'm really zipping through it. Now, how do I stop this? Or the letter K. pause or stop. And if I hit K again, it won't restart. It's just, K is just kind of kills all movement. It's like, whatever you're doing, maybe you're moving out of control. I want to stop. Letter K. So, okay, K stops. L plays forward. Maybe plays forward really fast if you hit it a few times. What does J do? Now, you may have guessed J will play backward. I hit the letter J, and it's going to play backwards. I hit it a second time. It'll play backwards faster. Third time. Fourth time. Fifth time. Fifth time's like 30 times speed or something like that. And again, if I want to stop it, so we can move fast through our footage using the J, K, and L. Well, mainly. Pretty close. Well, you can also do that with the J, K, and L keys. So in addition to just stopping your video, the K key, if you hold the K key down, it will let you play slow motion with the L key. Or together, slow motion. Frame at a time. You can also do this with J, K, and L. Just hold down the K key and tap the L forward. Holding down K and the J key. You also can do this with the left words, right arrow, one key forward. So these are for your video. So let's say I wanted to make sure I got this clip of Richard Sherman jumping up. L, playing forward in L, right? Clip. So tapping one frame at a time. Okay, 1, 2. With clip of this, the very first frame of this shot, I'm going to tap the letter I to set an endpoint. And then I went a little past the end of that clip, so I get tap and say go right up to the very last frame, backwards, forwards into the next frame, backwards, back to the last frame of Richard Sherman for out. And then I can go down to the end of my previous for in, and now I can perform an overwrite edit. And there, now I edit. The basics of 3-point editing. This is going to work the same in most video editing programs. It works very similar in Avid Media Composer. It worked very similar in the old Final Cut Pro. The new Final Cut Pro is a little different. It's got some of the same functionality. Some of it's a little more wonky, but it'll work that way. DaVinci Resolve, similar. So that is timeline. So if I want to go pinpointing. Okay, if you have any questions, of course, contact me through Canvas, and that concludes this lesson.